The late afternoon sky was tinged with soft orange, the final rays of sunlight stretching across the peaceful suburban streets. Inside, a sleek black Mercedes gliding smoothly along the boulevard, the gentle hum of jazz music blended with the bright, carefree laughter of two children. Jeffrey, a father, a husband, and the CEO of a central investment fund in Manhattan, sat behind the wheel, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror. There, his 10-year-old son Evan swayed to the rhythm of the music, while 12-year-old Isla, his daughter, munched on snacks and chatted excitedly. "Uncle Frank's nephew will probably have a mango-flavored cake," Isla said eagerly. "I hope there'll be games too," Evan chimed in, eyes sparkling. Jeffrey smiled, gently pressing on the accelerator. "We'll be on time," I promised. He wore a light gray suit, his tie slightly loosened, and a Swiss watch glinting under the dashboard lights. Everything was perfect. The luxury car, the sharp outfit, the cheerful kids. No one inside the car could have known that just a few minutes later, success, kindness, or expensive clothes would mean nothing. For some people out there, skin color is still an excuse for suspicion, for degradation, and for stripping away dignity. The Mercedes glided past rows of low houses, heading toward what was supposed to be a normal evening. Or at least, that's what they thought. The soft music still played inside the car when suddenly a piercing siren shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Jeffrey immediately glanced at the rearview mirror. A white and blue patrol car was tailing closely, red lights flashing, siren blaring. Jeffrey signaled and calmly pulled over to the side. Isla fell silent at once, and Evan looked at his father worriedly. Two officers, Mark and Joey, stepped out of the patrol car. They were young and white, and their expressions were stern, almost icy. No greetings, no smiles. Mark walked up to Jeffrey's window and tapped lightly on the glass. Jeffrey rolled down the window and asked calmly, "Is there a problem, officer?" Mark didn't respond right away. He glanced around the interior of the Mercedes, then looked Jeffrey up and down, as if assessing whether this luxury car had the right owner. "License and registration. Now." Jeffrey remained composed. He took out his wallet, carefully retrieved the documents and his license, and handed them over with both hands, deliberately slow and cautiously, to avoid misunderstanding. Joey stood further back, but his eyes didn't leave the children. Isla gripped Evan's hand tightly. Both could sense the tension thickening, even though nothing concrete had happened. Mark took the documents, glanced through them, then smirked slightly. "What do you do to be driving a car this nice?" Jeffrey responded politely. "I'm the director of an investment fund. I'm taking my kids to a classmate's party." But Mark's eyes didn't soften. They stayed filled with doubt. He didn't respond. He just looked at Joey and gave a subtle nod. Joey approached the car, one hand inching toward his belt, where his service weapon rested. At that moment, this no longer felt like a routine stop to Isla. It felt like a trap. She quietly lowered her head, grabbed her phone, and switched to video recording mode. Evan tightened his seatbelt. And Jeffrey. He could feel it now. The storm was coming. All because of the color of his skin. Mark handed the documents back, but instead of returning them to Jeffrey's hand, as basic courtesy would dictate, he dropped them onto the passenger seat, his tone dripping with mockery. "Nice car. Borrowed or stolen?" Jeffrey frowned, still maintaining his composure. "I've provided all the required documents. Everything is in order." Mark scoffed and turned to Joey. "You ever seen a black man driving a brand new white Mercedes around here?" Joey shook his head, his cold gaze silently agreeing. Jeffrey tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Isla began recording discreetly, her hands trembling but holding the phone steady. Evan remained silent, eyes flicking between his father and the two officers, his innocent gaze meeting injustice for the first time. "Step out of the vehicle, hands on the hood, now," Mark commanded, this time with no hint of politeness. Jeffrey was about to ask why, but when he saw Joey's hand gripping the butt of his gun, he stopped himself. Jeffrey opened the door and stepped out slowly, as if every movement might trigger the pull of a trigger. He walked to the front of the car, placing his hands on the cold hood, with only one question echoing in his mind. Why? But it wasn't over. Mark approached and, without a word, shoved Jeffrey's head down against the hood. Don't bother pretending. We know this game. The Black Investment Executive Act. Inside the car, Isla trembled. She aimed the phone out the window, recording every frame. Evan began to cry out, "Stop it! Don't do that to my dad. He didn't do anything." Joey glanced into the car and narrowed his eyes. "Get out. Now." Evan shook his head in panic, pressing himself into the seat. He had never seen anyone point a gun at his father, and now a gun was being pointed straight at him. Mark turned back to Joey and nodded, and then, "Don't scream. Hands up, Evan. Don't move," Jeffrey shouted, his head still pinned to the hood. His voice cracked, filled with fear and helplessness. Isla stopped recording. She was trembling violently now, tears streaming down her face. This was no longer a routine traffic stop. It was raw humiliation, a living testament to a poisonous belief. Black people can't drive Mercedes. The night breeze was cool, but Jeffrey's forehead was damp with sweat. His head was still forced down against the icy hood of the car, Mark's strong hand pressing the back of his neck as though he were a dangerous criminal. Isla quietly recorded video inside the vehicle, her hands trembling, but her gaze unwavering. She was only 13 years old, yet at that moment, she was the sole guardian of truth, capturing living evidence. Evan sat frozen, lips pressed tightly together. Just 10 years old, he had never experienced anything so terrifying. Seeing his father treated this way, he suddenly screamed in panic, "Let my dad go! He didn't do anything wrong! That's my dad!" Joey immediately turned, drew his gun, and pointed it directly at the car window. "Get out of the car! Now! Hands on your head!" Evan froze in place. He shook his head, tears running down his face, stammering, I don't know what to do." Jeffrey couldn't see what was happening behind him, but he could hear everything. The sound of Evan crying, the car door being yanked open, and Joey's menacing voice. His heart felt like it might shatter. He shouted, his voice raw and desperate, "Evan, don't scream! Put your hands up, son! Don't move! They have guns!" Jeffrey's voice was trembling but firm. He didn't care about dignity or pride. At that moment, his son's life was the only thing that mattered. Joey hesitated when he saw Evan slowly raise both hands, eyes brimming with tears, lips tightly sealed in a desperate effort not to sob. The air grew thick at that moment, heavy, terrifying, and senseless. Outside, Jeffrey was still pressed hard against the car, his body trembling, not from the cold, but from a storm of rage held back, from the fear that his 10-year-old son might become the next victim just because of the color of his skin. Though it lasted only a few minutes, that scene would forever remain etched in the memories of all three. What was meant to be a simple drive to a joyful party had become a living nightmare. In that brief moment, so still even the wind seemed to hold its breath, Jeffrey knew that things could spiral out of control if he didn't act. Though still pinned against the hood of the car, he forced his voice to stay calm, projecting just loud enough for both officers to hear. "My wife is Kelly Brown, captain of Precinct 3, badge number 4782. She's your colleague." Mark froze. Joey turned to look at his partner, his face shaken. The name Kelly Brown was not unfamiliar in law enforcement circles, one of the few black women to hold the county precinct captain rank. However, more than her position, Kelly was respected for her integrity and iron will. Mark swallowed hard. Just a moment ago, they thought they were detaining a suspicious black man. Now they realized He was the husband of their superior's superior's superior. Kelly Brown? Joey repeated, as if to confirm he hadn't imagined it. Jeffrey didn't respond. He nodded slowly, his eyes lifting from the cold hood. Not angry, not afraid. I'm just profoundly disappointed. A heavy silence fell. In the distance, the sound of sirens faded. A breeze rustled through the trees, but the cold in Jeffrey's eyes was enough to freeze both officers in place. Mark let go. Joey lowered his gun. We didn't know. Just a routine check, Mark said, voice noticeably smaller. Just a misunderstanding, Mr. Brown. You know how it is with the recent break-ins. We were doing our job. Jeffrey stood up straight, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He said nothing. His silence weighed heavier than any accusation. Joey quickly backed away, avoiding Isla's camera. Mark forced a weak, awkward smile. But the quiet contempt in Jeffrey's eyes said everything. We'll note in the system that you're a resident of this area. Jeffrey gave no reply. He opened the car door and returned to the driver's seat, where his 2 children sat, trying hard not to cry. One sentence, cold and firm. Seatbelts. And the Mercedes rolled away, leaving behind 2 white officers, cold sweat on their brows, and a shame they would never quite wash away. The Mercedes slowly pulled away from the curb. Inside the car, the music had stopped. The laughter was gone. Only a heavy silence filled the space. Evan trembled as he buckled his seatbelt. Isla still clutched her phone tightly, tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks. Jeffrey gripped the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead, but his hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from a deep, choking fury that had built up to its limit. He didn't look back. He didn't want to see them again. Behind them, Officers Mark and Joey stood frozen in the headlights of another car turning onto the street. They still hadn't spoken a word to each other. Confusion, panic, and shame seeped into every blink, every breath. "What did we just do?" Joey whispered, his voice cracking into the night. Mark replied softly, as if trying to cling to the last shred of pride. "Just a misunderstanding. Routine check." Joey said nothing more. Even he couldn't believe that answer anymore. Inside the car, Isla looked at her father through the rearview mirror. His face appeared calm, but his jaw was clenched, his wrists stiffening with every squeeze of the steering wheel. Her voice came out choked. "What were they going to do to you? If I hadn't filmed, if you hadn't said Mom's name?" Jeffrey answered quietly, "It's over now, sweetheart. We're okay." But Evan couldn't stay silent. "Why did they do that? Why did they think you stole your car?" Jeffrey took a deep breath, steadying his voice. "Because to them, my skin is the first crime, and success, profession, or morals are things they don't want to see." As the car passed the last streetlight of the neighborhood and turned onto the familiar boulevard, Jeffrey knew one thing for sure. What had just happened could not be dismissed. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a routine check. And without a doubt, this would not be the end. The house was bathed in the soft glow of the kitchen lights, but the atmosphere hung heavy, as if something had shattered silently in the air. Kelly, the regional police chief and Jeffrey's wife, was clearing the dinner table when the sound of the door opening rang out. "Mom!" Isla cried, running in, tears still streaking her face. "What happened, sweetheart?" Kelly asked, alarmed, rushing toward her. Evan followed behind, his face still pale. Jeffrey came in last, his shoulders weighed down, as if he carried the darkness of the night itself. "Mark and Joey," Jeffrey said quietly, locking eyes with his wife. "They pulled us over, humiliated me, in front of the kids." Isla said nothing more. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling, and pressed play. On the screen, footage of Jeffrey pinned to the hood, Evan's cries. Jeffrey yelled, "Hands up, don't scream, don't move." Then came the part where Jeffrey mentioned Kelly's name, her rank and precinct, followed by the dead silence from the officers. Kelly stood frozen. She didn't blink. Not a single breath. Only her fists tightening, knuckles turning white. When the video ended, Isla whispered, "I want to post it online, Mom, so people will know, so they'll see this isn't just something in the movies." Kelly looked at her daughter, the face of a police chief, mother, and wife, filled with torment. She stepped forward and gently but firmly touched Isla's phone. "No, sweetheart, you can't post it." "But why, Mom? If no one speaks up, this will keep happening." Kelly bent down, resting her hands on Isla's shoulders, looking directly into her daughter's eyes. "Because if you post it, your face, Evan's face, it'll be out there. And to those who hate people like us, kids like you are the easiest targets. Do you understand?" Isla burst into tears. Evan turned away, hiding his pain. Kelly pulled both children into her arms, holding them tight. "I won't stay silent, but I'll fight it my way, and I promise you, this will not be forgotten." In Kelly's eyes at that moment, there was fire. Not a rage that exploded, but the fire of someone who had spent her life fighting for justice, and now realized the fight had come into her own home. That night, after the children had fallen sound asleep, Kelly sat alone in her home office, the glow of the computer screen casting light across her solemn face. She watched the video Isla had recorded, over and over again. Each time she heard her daughter's shaky voice and her husband trying to stay calm, her heart clenched tighter. Kelly wasn't just a mother consumed by rage. She was a police chief, a woman with the authority to act. But within the system she worked for, she also knew one bitter truth. Power often hides behind medals pinned to the wrong chests. She opened up the internal personnel files. One by one, the data appeared. Mark Riley, mid-level patrol officer. 14 complaints in the past 6 years. 10 of those tied to allegations of racial discrimination. Not a single case led to serious disciplinary action. Kelly clenched her teeth. The reason for case closures? Insufficient evidence. A polite way of saying, "We're not going to do anything." Joey Sanders, Mark's partner, looked cleaner. Almost no official disciplinary records. But Kelly knew his type. The kind who follows orders, stays silent, and turns away. And that was just as dangerous. She brought the files to Lieutenant Mitchell, Mark and Joey's direct superior. He skimmed a few pages, then exhaled. "Mark can be a bit hot-headed, but he's a good officer. This might have just been a misunderstanding. I'll give him a warning." "A warning?" Kelly repeated, her voice turning ice cold. "Yes, I'll make a note. But let's not escalate it. They didn't know Jeffrey was your husband. They thought he was just some guy." Kelly gripped the file tighter. The calm drained from her voice. No one has the right to strip a person of their dignity, regardless of who they are, what car they drive, or the color of their skin. She stepped out of the office and stood in silence in the empty hallway of the police department. A place she once believed was a fortress for justice, now felt like a shelter for those like Mark, who'd survived countless allegations without consequence. That night, Kelly didn't sleep, and the next morning, the entire department was stunned by the news. Police Chief Kelly Brown had called for an internal emergency meeting regarding misconduct by 2 active duty officers. The fight had officially begun, not for power, not for reputation, but for family. For the children who watched their father be treated like a criminal, just for being black. That morning, the 3rd-floor conference room at the police department was unusually crowded. Police Chief Kelly Brown entered, her uniform crisp and sharp, her face no longer bearing the softness of a mother, but the presence of a woman prepared to stand against an entire system if necessary. She walked to the front of the room, her eyes scanning every officer. Some met her gaze, some looked away. No one dared to speak. No one smiled. The atmosphere was thick, like a storm was about to break. Today, I didn't call this meeting to talk about administrative violations or late patrol logs, she began, her voice calm but heavy with weight. I want to talk about fear, about a night when my daughter screamed in terror as she watched her father, an innocent man, have his head forced down onto a car hood, and about the 2 officers in this department who did that. A chilling silence. Then the name Mark Riley left Kelly's lips, and every eye turned toward the corner of the room where Mark sat, face rigid, lips pressed into a thin line. Joey sat beside him, head bowed, hands clasped together. I have evidence, video, records, complaints that were never reviewed, and now this will not be buried like before. No one objected. No one dared. That afternoon, Mark appeared at Kelly's office door. Gone was the arrogance he usually carried. He stood there, hat in hand, voice raspy. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was your husband. I lost control. I'll take responsibility. Kelly looked up from her stack of files. Her eyes didn't burn with anger. They held something deeper, profound disappointment. You're not apologizing because you were wrong. You're apologizing because the man you targeted turned out to be my husband. What if it had been another black man? Someone who wasn't Jeffrey? Mark fell silent. He had no words. An hour later, Joey came in as well. He didn't say much. He only bowed his head slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do when Mark acted that way. I just followed along. Kelly looked him in the eyes. Then learn. Learn to tell right from wrong. Learn to say no, because if you don't, you'll become another Mark. And I swear, I won't forgive it next time. Joey nodded, eyes wet, voice small. I understand. Kelly took a deep breath. For a moment, she considered filing formal disciplinary charges. But then she glanced out the window, where her 2 children were playing in the yard, still innocent, still unaware of how cruel the world could be. She didn't forgive because they deserved it. She forgave because Isla and Evan deserved a world where people are taught, not just punished. She signed the internal memo. Official warning. Strict monitoring for 6 months. But she knew. The most significant battle wasn't in that meeting room. It was in the heart of every officer putting on a uniform daily. And today, she had just lit the first spark. That afternoon, the backyard of Jeffrey's home was bathed in the glow of the setting sun. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, and dry leaves crunched beneath Isla and Evan's feet. 2 children who had just lived through an unforgettable night. Not because of fear, but because of questions with no answers. Jeffrey sat on his familiar wooden chair, eyes distant in thought. He raised a hand, gently calling his children over. Come here. Dad wants to talk for a bit. Evan sat down first, glancing nervously around, afraid someone might appear out of nowhere. Isla hugged her knees, her eyes still red. Jeffrey placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze gentle but firm. Son, you were courageous that night, but I need you to understand something. When you're dealing with the police, especially when they have guns, you have to stay calm. Don't shout, don't flinch. Do exactly as they say, very slowly, because even one wrong move can cost a life. Isla's voice cracked. But you didn't do anything wrong. Why did they treat you like that? Jeffrey looked at his daughter. That question he had asked himself hundreds of times in his own life. He squeezed Isla's hand gently, his voice lowering. Because we're black, sweetheart. And sometimes, that alone is enough to make them afraid. And out of fear, they act that way. But you must never fear yourself. Never hate your skin. Never back down. He looked up at both of them. Your mother and I have spent our whole lives fighting to give you a better world. But I know, it's not enough. There will still be days when you're doubted and disrespected, just for being who you are. He picked a dry blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. When that happens, you must remember that staying alive is the most important thing. I don't need you to be heroes. I need you to live, so that one day you can change the world through your wisdom, courage, and kindness. Evan looked up and whispered, "I was terrified, Dad." Jeffrey pulled both children into his arms and held them tight. "I was scared too, Evan. I've never been that scared. But because I was afraid, I knew I had to protect you at all costs." A while later, Isla looked up, her tears now dry. "One day, I want to be a lawyer. I'll protect people like you." Jeffrey smiled, for the first time the lightest smile since it all happened. "And I believe you will. Both of you will." Above them, the sunset had faded into soft purple, and in that father's heart, one thing had never been clearer. The fight for justice may never end, but if there's a place to begin, it's right here, in the arms and in the hearts of the children he held.